Okay. Hello, everyone. I know I'm lunch is next, and thank you so much for the organizers for asking me to be here today and talk about some of our work involving crib camera videos in sudden unexplained death in childhood. So right off the bat, I just want to give everyone a little bit of a content warning here if the title doesn't say it all, but I will be discussing research findings of videos that recorded some child deaths. I won't be showing the videos themselves, but I'm going to be talking about the findings from them in detail. So if this is not a good match for you today, totally fine by me if you want to go get a cup of tea or check out from your computer at home for the next 15 minutes. So we've heard a lot about infants and sleep and research since yesterday morning. I'm going to talk about those children who live past their first birthday, but their deaths are similarly very, very unexpected and explained after a thorough investigation. And these, by definition, are children between 12 months and 18 years. So the new US 2024 stats just came out. It showed that 378 children between the ages of 1 and 18 were left unexplained after a thorough investigation. There's some slight bias, like we see in infants. The majority of these deaths, more than half, are toddlers age 1 to 4. And if you see on that graph, you'll see that 1 to 2-year-olds really are much, much higher than the rest, a 5-fold increase of the 12 to 23-month-olds versus any other year above that. We see increased disparity, Black versus white populations. And just if we're thinking of those 378 children, that equates to over 25,000 life years lost just in 2024 in the US. Another term I'm going to be talking about is febrile seizures. And the reason is that febrile seizures are considered very benign. They occur in children 6 months to 5 years. 3 to 4% of all US children have them. Pediatricians will report to you dozens and dozens of cases they've seen in their offices, and they're considered benign, no negative outcomes on those children. What we see in SUDC cases is a 10-fold increase from that. And this was first identified just 20 years ago in 2005 in terms of some of the first registry cases in the San Diego data set. And febrile seizures come in 2 different categories, simple and complex. Simple are brief, they're less than 15 minutes, they're generalized, so they affect the whole body, and they don't repeat in 24 hours. And complex are different based on one of those factors. The rare negative outcomes that are most known about febrile seizures is a slight increased risk of developing epilepsy, more in complex febrile seizures. But the simple febrile seizures are the ones that we most often see in SUDC cases. So the work I'm going to be talking about today all comes from the SUDC Registry and Research Collaborative at NYU. It was started in 2014, and you can see our website there. You can get a lot more information about that. All of the data that we bring in starts and really centralizes on a really deep dive of every single child enrolled and how much we can learn from them. And part of that was a collection of information, which some of these children had these crib camera videos. But you'll see, and one of the other lecturers this morning mentioned that, it gives food for thought, these lectures here. And it's the same thing with reviewing our specific child deaths. We generate new hypotheses, and we're able to do these experiments out in the bubbles as a result of that, which facilitates even more research. So I'm talking about crib camera monitors. I just wanted to mention infant monitors have been around about 100 years. The first one was in 1938. It was called the Zenith Radio Nurse, and it came about out of fear and it was created by the president of Zenith to put a monitor in his daughter's room to make sure no one could come in and abduct her. It came from a place of fear. And with technology over the decades, you saw these changes of one-way and two-way sound radios or monitors. And then in the 90s, remember the nanny cams, like the little teddy bears that would sit on a shelf. Now in 2026, it's reported over 160 different brands of home baby monitors. These are wearables. They're literally worn on the child. There's nearables, lots of different items, monitors can be in the room. Some record, some are cloud stored, some are stored on your app on your phone. These are just a couple pictures here. I work with one of our undergrad students who's always updating my PowerPoint on what is available of monitors out there. And it's ever changing. You always have to keep up with it. So going back to our registry, we've enrolled over 400 cases. This is some information on the first 301 that completed reviews on our end. All of the cases that come through our registry go through a detailed blinded multidisciplinary review panel. Blinding meaning all the investigators involved don't know who the child is, where they lived, who investigated the case, and probably most importantly, what was the opinion of the original pathologist. And when we look at the younger SUDC cases versus the older SUDC cases in our registry, we see a different profile emerge. The younger kids have much higher risk factors for febrile seizures, which occur in that age group. And as I mentioned before, about tenfold versus the general population, so over 29%. Also about 20% history of a family member with febrile seizures in the immediate family. And that also goes along with febrile seizures. They tend to have a dominant inheritance and run in families. About half of the children had signs or symptoms of illness beforehand. Mild cold symptoms. They had a cough. They had a slight fever. Almost all of them were sleep related in the children, distinctly different than the older children. And they were mostly unwitnessed, again, similar to the infants. Hardly any of them bed share compared to infants. Less than 5% of our SUDC cases were bed sharing. And over half were found completely face straight down into the mattress. And think about that a lot. I mean, we talk about face down and we talk about with very young infants, and you think about, well, a 6-week-old, an 8-week-old, a 12-week-old, they don't have the development skills, the strength, the motor coordination to be able to move, lift their head, roll, turn. But here we're talking about kids after their first birthday. These kids, if they have normal development, which most of them do, they're crawling, they're probably walking. Some of them probably can climb out of their crib if they want to. We don't think of that face down position as something that is lethal in and of itself, but it always made us wonder, what would make them not intact to respond as we normally would expect them to in the situation that we see such a preponderance of this. So this paper was published about 2 years ago. It's a very, very small data set. It included 7 videos of crib camera videos from the home environment. There were 4 boys and 3 girls. Their ages were between 13 and 27 months. All of them had normal development. The home videos, 5 of them were continuously recorded. The camera was on all the time, recording, recording, recording. 2 of them were triggered by sound or motion. So unless the child made a noise, the child moved in a significant enough way, the camera didn't click on to record. And in those cases, it recorded 10, 30 seconds. So here's an example of one that was triggered by a motion or sound. And you can get the feel, we don't understand the full story here. What we see in these little blips of the gray is the camera was turned off, we don't have no information. And then we have these blips of like 30 seconds where we see the child is alive, they're breathing, nothing else really jumps off the screen at you, what's going on. So it was hard to understand really what happened to this child. So this was considered an indeterminate video. So I mentioned before, all 7 of the cases, like all of our cases in the registry, go through this blinded multidisciplinary review. We classify cases based on the unexplained pediatric deaths guideline that I mentioned in an earlier session. Of these 7 cases, it was deemed that none of them had diagnostic findings in terms of cardiac pathology, neuropathology, or trio whole exome genetic sequencing. And TRIO, just for everyone, that means we're studying the child and we're also studying both parents' genetic sequencing to use them as a comparator. Allows us to identify what's unique in the child versus what might be inherited. 6 out of the 7 were considered after everything, including the videos, to be unexplained sudden deaths with intrinsic and extrinsic factors. One of them was attributed to asphyxia, and this one was, the asphyxia was due to an obstruction of the airway due to enlarged tonsils in the setting of viral and bacterial infections. So we really focused on our 5 continuous videos. They were reviewed independently by 2 epileptologists, collectively with over 50 years of experience of taking care of patients with seizures and epilepsy. And then we had more than 6 forensic pathologists independently look at these videos. Of the 5 continuous videos, every single one of them showed a convulsive event. This was quite shocking to us because you see on the far left, only one of these children had a history of febrile seizures. The other 4, we don't know. Was this the first one? But we don't know. Almost all of them had some sort of mild signs or symptoms of illness. Again, nothing that you would rush to the ER about. They had a little cold. They had, these are kids between 1 and 3 years of old. They tend to get a lot of colds. They were all sleep related. They were all on their bellies. And 4 out of 5 were face down. The only one that was not face down was a child whose face was to the side that showed airway obstruction due to aspiration at the time of autopsy. So all of them had airway impacted. It was also important to note that these children did not die during these convulsive events. They were all alive for at least 2 minutes afterwards. I'll show you in the next slide, up to almost a half hour where we could see the signs of life. Here's another example. Red is showing movement. The little circle shows when the convulsive event occurred. And the sound is in blue. And you'll see in this child, as the others, all the convulsive events were less than 1 minute in duration. So if you think back to that febrile seizure graphic of simple versus complex, these were all brief. They were not status epilepticus where these seizures went on for a long time. But you'll see there was a brief seizure and then there's abnormal breathing for almost a half hour afterwards before the last sign of life occurs. This prone face position still makes us think a lot about this and understanding the role that seizures might be associated with some of these deaths. So we went back to all the data and we looked at, well, what's the probability of face down position in children by age and by those with a history of febrile seizures and those without? And we saw these 2 interesting trends. The blue is children who did not have any history of febrile seizures. And you'll see that the probability of finding them prone, face down, goes down the older they get. But the children with the history of febrile seizures, it stays elevated. It does not decrease over time with age. I also want to reiterate the limitations, as I've kind of mentioned, is a small sample size. Could this be selection bias? The video quality was variable. Some of them were more difficult to see. And we had no physiological monitoring on them. We did not have EEGs on them. We did not have EKGs. All of our assessments were limited to what we could see and what we could hear. But it also made me think about, well, are these, even though the cardiac pathology was negative and there was no cardiac findings on genetics, what is the relationship of face prone position in our non-infectious cardiac deaths in the registry? So this I just did last night because I was like, now I'm intrigued and I want to know what the data says. So we have 15 of these types of cases in the registry. 6 I didn't include, but 9 were all attributed to arrhythmias or cardiomyopathies. Just 2 of them were found prone face down. Almost 80% were not. So again, showing that those other ones likely were not due to cardiac reasons along with that. So in conclusion, all of the continuous videos, we found convulsive events. We don't know why these seizures occurred. We don't know why these children died after them. We think mild infections may have lowered the seizure threshold. Postictal depression of arousal or reflexes likely contributed. And as I mentioned, these parallel the courses that we see in monitored SUDC cases that was mentioned yesterday, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. We had another talk yesterday about infants and seizure markers, and I just want to mention infant seizures are often very subtle. Sometimes they're just isolated apneas, and therefore they're probably likely underdiagnosed, and we don't really understand how big a problem that is. So our next question was, can we identify a seizure marker in these videos that could identify risk or protection of sudden death going forward? So this is a project we have and I'm going to be blatant, I'm going to be asking for your help. We got a grant from AES and working with several crib monitoring companies to collect videos of febrile seizure controls. Children living that had a febrile seizure during sleep, it was caught on camera, they had no negative side effects. Studying those compared to our SUDC videos, we've collected more SUDC videos since the paper came out. We have these febrile seizure controls, but anything we can add to the sample side will just make the conclusions richer. If you know of any SUID or SUDC tragedies that do have videos, please let us know. Please reach out. Love to collaborate and put those together and add to learn as much as we can from these tragedies. And finally, for the investigators at the scene, lots of these video devices, it's extremely time sensitive to get the data as soon as possible. Depending on the membership of different devices, the camera company may only have the data for 24 hours. They may have it less. It may only be on the parent's phone app for a very temporary period of time. So do not delay. Make sure if you identify, look for any devices in the room, ask the family about it, because again, some of them kind of look like toys. You may not recognize them as devices, but get all the information. Make sure you maintain the audio when you record them and get timestamps. And we've consulted with forensic photographers on some videos to help improve that clarity. Thank you for everyone, for our team at NYU, our external collaborators, all the sponsors, the amazing support that we have for our research, and most greatly, thank you for the bereaved families who entrust us with this incredibly sensitive information to improve the health of other children going forward. So thank you so much.